And let's start streaming on Facebook. It'll take me a second to get logged in, but we can kind of get started.
Hello, everybody. This is Melissa Bryant. I'll go ahead and kick off the meeting. Welcome to the meeting for this month. I'm excited to get these back up and going. Hope everybody had a wonderful summer. First on the agenda, what we'll do is I'll start the roll call for the Technical and Community Committee, and then hopefully by then we'll have more of the members from the Climate Equity team on so that Adelita can do the roll call for that committee. So if you would just say present, Dee Dee.
I'm here.
Ashley. Ashley Bird. Okay. Melissa Bryant, present. Rick Cavender.
Present.
James Cooper. Matt Cox. Neil DeBage.
Present.
Karen Guz.
Present.
Ashley Harris.
She mentioned she would come in late. She has responsibilities for about the first hour of this meeting.
Okay. Thank you. Cami Horn.
Here.
Miriam Juckett.
Present.
Stephen Lukey. Kelly Lyons.
Present.
Francisco Menon.
Present.
Marvin Pear.
Present.
Jimmy Perkins. John Placia. Angela Rodriguez.
Present.
Estela Cota Trevino.
Present.
David Walter.
Present.
Sorry, was David on?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, present.
Ryan Weber.
Present.
And then Adelita, I'm counting you as the other committee member.
Present.
And
I'll hand
Melissa,
it over
Ashley
to
Bird
you.
is here. She's just having some audio difficulties, but Ashley Bird is present.
Ashley Bird is present. Great.
Melissa John Plesha, I just signed in.
Okay. Thank you. We have a quorum. Adelita, I'll hand it over to you for your roll call.
Thank you. Aaron Aguelo,
Present.
Anacua Garcia,
Present.
Jesus Garcia Gonzalez, Harjat Kaur,
Present.
Diana Lopez Perez,
Present.
Joshua Scott, Joe Simpson,
Present.
and then Melissa. And that is it. I do not believe we have a quorum for climate and equity. Is that correct, Doug?
You do have a quorum.
Oh, we do. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, well, go ahead and get started. You can see we have a packed agenda today, so we'll go ahead and get started with our welcome, land acknowledgement, public comment, meeting norms, and approval of minutes. So I believe, Adelita?
Yes,
Yes.
thank you. When we talk about climate change, we are talking about what the future holds for our younger, newer generations and all life on this planet. However, it is important to reflect on those who were here before us for tens of thousands of years, who were stewards of the land and who continue leading efforts to protect this land. By their example, we honor the 7 generations before us and the 7 generations to come. We acknowledge with respect that the land we are on is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Kaiwotekan, Tonkawa, and Humanos peoples, and all other tribes not explicitly stated. Not all indigenous peoples listed claim Texas as ancestral lands, as many were forcibly relocated to Texas from their ancestral homes. And I will go on to the next slide and remind us of our mission of race equity. And remember that race equity is a result. As the result, it is the condition that would be achieved if one's racial identity no longer predicted in a statistical sense how one fares. As the work, we are looking at using this term, we are thinking about racial equity as one part of racial justice. And thus we also include work to address the root causes of inequities, not just their manifestations. This includes elimination of policies, practices, attitudes, and cultural messages that reinforce differential outcomes by race or fail to eliminate them. And I think we're on to public comment.
Yep, and we did not have anybody sign up for public comment, but for folks who are watching virtually, you can always get in touch with our office regarding the protocol to sign up for public comment, but nothing for this meeting, so thank you.
I will just go over the meeting norms. We ask that you stay engaged, you speak your truth, you practice kindness, no fixing, experience discomfort, take risks, listen for understanding, expect and accept non-closure. Members speak in queue without interruption. So if you would like to speak, please raise your hand and Adelita and I can call on you. Also, just a reminder, please keep your cameras on so that we can have a quorum the entire meeting. So I would like to ask somebody to make a motion for approval of the meeting minutes.
So approved.
Second, this is
I'm sorry,
Adelita.
can you state your name first so we can write it down for the minutes?
Sorry, Rick Cavender, approval of the minutes.
Adelita, second.
And we'll do a roll. Do we need to do a roll call on this again?
Alma, is a roll call needed for minutes?
Yes.
Okay. Didi Belmaris,
Here.
in favor of the minutes?
Yes.
Okay. Ashley Bird,
Yes, in favor.
Melissa Bryant, yes. Rick Cavender,
Yes.
Neil DeBage,
If I was incorrectly listed as abstaining as part of the equity committee, does that mean I need to vote no, or does that not really matter?
I think if you reviewed the minutes and you approve of them, because it would have said that,
No, I abstained last time, but it lists me as part of the equity committee and not the technical committee.
We can make that edit
Yeah,
for the record.
So can I conditionally approve, or?
you can just approve with the amended change.
Okay, that sounds good. I'll approve with that amendment.
Does everyone who previously voted aye concur?
So Didi, do you concur?
Sorry, yes. Trying to get off.
Ashley? Ashley
Yes.
Bird? Melissa
Yes.
Bryant, yes. Rick Cavender?
Yes.
Great. Karen Guz?
Yes.
Ashley Harris, is she on yet? Okay, Cami Horn?
Yes.
Miriam Juckett?
Yes.
Kelly Lyons? I think she's one that was having audio issues. Francisco Mannon?
Yes.
Marvin Pear,
Yes.
John Placia,
Yes.
Angela Rodriguez,
Yes.
Estela Cota Trevino,
Yes.
David Walter,
Yes.
Ryan Weber,
Yes.
and Adelita Cantu.
Yes.
And I'll let you do your roll call also.
Okay, thank you.
Minutes.
Okay, I thought I was on mute. Aaron Aguelo,
Yes.
Anaqua Garcia, Jesus Garcia Gonzalez, if he's on it. Harjat,
Yes.
Diana Lopez Perez,
Yes.
Joshua Scott, Joe Simpson,
Yes.
and Melissa.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, now we are going to have a presentation from Councilwoman Sandoval on the Dedicated Resiliency, Energy Efficiency, and Sustainability Fund. So Councilwoman, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Ana Sandoval, District 7 councilperson, and I'm also pretty much a liaison to Doug's office for the council. I don't have a full-blown presentation for you yet, but I do. Did everyone get Mateo's email last week when the budget was adopted about the funding? So I think it's great news, but I also feel like I kind of have to apologize to you because I sort of just pulled out 4 categories that I thought were most urgent and would be most likely to get the support from my council colleagues. And in fact, they approved hey, I'm sorry, could we take off the slide so that I can see more faces when we're talking? Since I don't have any content anyway, okay. I see Melissa's face. And it's big. Okay, there we go. All right, now I see more faces. Thanks. So I'll just tell you a little bit about how this came about in our next steps, and how I also want to hear from you about your role in helping us shape this. So basically what we did, or what my office put forward, was a proposal for a permanent fund for climate action. We called it Resiliency, Energy Efficiency, and Sustainability, REES, which also happens to be the last name of our executive secretary. No coincidence. I mean, it's just a coincidence. And we as a team identified 4 areas that we thought were most urgent and that would also get the support of our council members. That said, we are not limited to those 4 areas. It was simply a proposal at that time. So the proposed areas are urban heat island mitigation. So going through with a pilot or continuing that work once we've gone through a pilot. And that includes supporting resiliency centers as well. Small grants to community organizations. I think it's very important that whether it's a school or a small organization, that they are getting this word out and educating and engaging the community around it. Another one has to do with leveraging funds. So making sure we have a dedicated person that's either going to be a grant writer or monitoring the process with the Inflation Reduction Act, so that our city is competitive in bringing some of those dollars home. We have a staff that does government affairs, but by and large, the focus of the city when it comes to government affairs at the federal level has really had to do with military grants, maybe a little bit of transportation grants, but I would like for somebody to be dedicated to this area. And then lastly, it is technical assistance and some level of incentives to businesses. I know at least one person on this committee has already expressed concerns about that to me, so we can absolutely talk through it. So that was the proposal that I shared with the council members, and was able to get support from all of them. We had 10 votes in favor of the budget that day. Now, what's next? So what council approved was this amount, which is approximately $10 million a year. What I'm indexing it to is the 14% of CPS revenue that the city gets from CPS, but the one that comes off of the step surcharge, the step fee, right? So if CPS collects approximately, you know, $70 million in step revenues, then we get 14% of that. And instead of putting that into our general fund to go to paying for police officers, parks and recreation, I am requesting that all of that go to this fund, that 14%, okay? So the next steps are for us to go, for city staff and myself to work on a more detailed proposal and take that to council, and then we can talk about how we're going to expend the funds, at least in the first year, maybe in the first 2 years. Now, how do we do that? I would like to begin by working with Doug and his team to engage this group. So Doug, we don't have a timeline set up for that yet, but I just wanted to make sure I got in front of you quickly once this fund got approved, so that you knew that we want you to be a part of this. So someone's got an echo. What I anticipate is that Doug and I will probably comb through the cap and sort of see what we can push forward, and then come back to you for additional ideas. I'm open, Doug, if you wanted to have a subcommittee work on it, if you wanted to have the whole group work on it, you guys can decide what's the best way to engage the cap. Between now and then, if you have specific comments or questions, you can send them to my office. And if you could send them to put a subject line for, you know, new fund, you can call it the climate fund. And if you would just send it to District 7 at sanantonio.gov. So that's district number 7 at sanantonio.gov. And then we'll keep track of those as input from this group. I just don't want you to have to wait if there's something that you want to know right away. So again, that's just the overall framework. We do want to flesh it out in detail and get some money rolling out the door this year for some of this stuff. So I know I was only supposed to speak until 4:20, and it's 4:23. So that's really all I have to say. Oh, go ahead.
If I could just provide some just a really quick context, what a big deal this is, that the councilwoman and her colleagues were able to get this through. There's very few cities, nobody in Texas, very few cities across the country that have a dedicated fund like this. And so it's a huge opportunity. So Councilwoman, I just want to thank you. I mean, it really is, it's all about putting our money where our mouth is. And it's one thing to have staff, it's one thing to have a plan, but it's something else to have resources that we can actually leverage and start working. I'm sorry to interrupt, Councilwoman, but.
I'm done. Thank you. I did not believe it was going to happen, but it did. So, go ahead, Mr. McCary. Yeah.
Off of mute. No, I just wanted to echo what Doug was saying, that is very much appreciative. And at the same time, it allows us to have that added support of funding, so that as this committee moves things forward, when we talk about things that can be done, at least there's dollars in supporting of that as well. So thank you for your championship as well. Thank you.
All right, that's all I have. Doug, I don't know if you want to take 1 or 2 questions, or if you just want people to email that. Oh, okay. If anyone has any questions at this point or comments at this point.
Questions?
I'll just say this is amazing. $10 million, you know, is a great start for us to truly be investing in sustainability and resiliency. So to echo what they're saying, looking forward to how this progresses.
Thanks, Stephen.
I
Well,
think this is great. Thank you so much for your advocation.
Cami.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman. I just wanted to echo what everyone's saying, and I love the idea of going through the CAP and thinking creatively, and as others have said, being supported monetarily. So thank you so much for the support.
Yeah, of course. So my staff reminds me to tell everyone it's approximately $10 million, but every year. So it's not just this year. What our goal was is to establish something in perpetuity. So as long as the STEP program exists, this will exist. And if the STEP program goes away, hopefully the next council will find another way to do it. And then Diana.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, I think part of some of the conversations were ensuring that some of that funding, that there's as little barriers in terms of community access to that funding, as well as ensuring that we are holding those that are the most polluting facilities accountable, which oftentimes are the businesses of San Antonio that are often left out of some of this accountability work. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how this group, how the advisory committee could be in support and work towards figuring out some type of barriers or using that equity tool to ensure that some of those funds move to the community, because it's really needed at this point. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Deanna. And I just want to highlight, we did specifically call that out as a category for funding, is community organization. So great. Okay, well, that's all I have. I know you guys have a very exciting agenda. So I will probably be listening in, but I'm going to turn off my video. Thank you, Mr. Belnick. Thank you, Mr. McCary.
Thank you so much. Now I'll turn it over to Doug to talk about the Office of Sustainability Fiscal Year 23 budget and staffing, council priorities, and key initiatives.
Great, thank you so much. And I'll try to go quickly because there's a lot, but not only is that fund a game changer, this was a good year for the office in terms of other resources. And I want to publicly thank Assistant City Manager David McCary for helping us through this process, because our limiting factors have always been resources and staffing. As you all know, there's a tremendous amount of things to do, and there was just a handful of us. And so when David and I started talking about requesting staff, I was always hoping for one person. Well, David was able to help a lot. And so here you see in this slide, we'd requested 4 positions, and we got them, as well as another one, which I'll talk about in a minute, which is a reclassification of another position. But you'll see we're funded from two funds, the Solid Waste Fund and the Energy Efficiency Fund. And on the solid waste side, we're getting a climate adaptation manager. The second A in the CAP is adaptation, and we had nobody focused on it. So we'll have a manager who can help with that. And then a management analyst, which is an entry-level position to really sort of just support across the board. We're trying to expand the pipeline of talent. We've been very flat with lots of managers, but really no one is sort of on the entry-level side. So we're really excited about that analyst position. And then on the energy efficiency side, and you can see 2 additional positions, a sustainable and renewable energy manager who's going to help our existing team with delivering municipal energy efficiency projects, as well as supporting our renewable portfolio that we're hoping to have grow soon, as well as a staff person who's going to focus on capital projects, working with other city departments on bond projects. How do we start making sure that when we invest resources in roads, in buildings, they're as sustainable and as efficient as possible? And so here's just a high-level org chart. Our sort of main service delivery areas are these areas in red, and you can see I didn't talk about this one. This is a reclassification of a fiscal position that we were able to reprogram. who's going to be a senior municipal sustainability manager focused on with our organizational work. So basically, you can see we're almost doubling the size of the department, and that, in addition with these additional financial resources, I think we're very excited that we're really going to start accelerating a lot of the work that we're doing. And I already shared this PowerPoint with you all, but be happy to answer any questions going forward on this. Just some highlights as far as what we're focused on this coming fiscal year. If you remember, we have an energy efficiency fund, which is a revolving fund that we invest in city buildings, quantify what the energy efficiency savings are, capture those, and put them back into city, the fund. So about $1.4 million worth of projects, predominantly lighting retrofits and retro commissioning, but you can see the locations listed. And then really, what we're particularly really excited about, as I had mentioned, is working with Public Works and other key departments on establishing, what does consistency look like? And we've talked about this before in previous meetings as far as, what those requirements are going to be for bond projects. But basically, this is really going to set what is the standard, what is the bare minimum that projects need to meet, as well as we'd like to find a few projects that we can really push for stretch goals and really sort of highlight buildings or other types of projects that we really push the envelope on to show this is the way we need to do it, and we can quantify and capture those savings. Maybe I'll go through the next few slides, and then we can have some questions. On our municipal sustainability initiatives, what we're doing internally, as the councilwoman alluded to, federal funding. I mean, that is a game changer. Infrastructure funding, the Inflation Reduction Act. It's got climate and sustainability written all over it, and so again, making sure that we are competitive and bring those dollars home. Focusing on climate adaptation, that could be biodiversity, that could be food systems, urban heat island mitigation, continuing to work on fleet efficiency within our organization, training our employees, making sure departments are, their work plans are consistent with climate objectives. And then we should have the 2021 inventory done by the end of this month. And so that will, I haven't seen how it's going, but that'll be a really important indicator to know what our emissions look like between 2019 and 2021. Really quickly on the community side, Karen will talk a little more about the benchmarking program. Energy code is still in play. Development Services Department presented to Council's Planning and Community Development Committee, and they asked Development Services to sort of put a temporarily hold off on the energy code because they had some more questions around EV and solar ready. So we think there's an opportunity to try to push a little more on that front. Again, really continuing on the electrification in terms of publicly accessible charging infrastructure, transportation demand management, policy evaluation with, that would be for large employers, seeing what are the options. They'll be working with the transportation department, and then you'll hear in a little more about communications and engagement, because half the battle that we're all dealing with is getting people to understand the why and to engage and become active in the solutions. And then I'm really excited about this. Dr. Debbage presented to Council very briefly on urban heat island and why it's important after this summer. It's on everybody's radar, and so one of the things that we've gotten direction from the city manager and from Council is to develop a UHI program, and we believe that the new climate adaptation manager position would be a perfect lead for this in collaboration with other departments. And so it's all about building research partnerships, looking at the data, developing plans related to all the different mitigation tools that we should be looking at, and start getting projects out there. We need to walk and chew gum at the same time. Yes, we need data, we need research, but we know what some of the mitigation techniques are, and we need to start deploying them. And again, as the councilwoman highlighted, that's one of the pillars of this new funding. So it's going to be a really exciting year. And then finally, really quick update, the proposal RFP for solar procurement on municipal facilities went out August 31st. It's about 80 facilities. We estimate upwards of 11 to 13 megawatts. There's a potential. These would be designed to go right into city facilities to help reduce the load at those buildings. We worked with Rocky Mountain Institute on this, and they let us know that they believe this is the largest, potentially largest on-site municipal solar procurement to date nationally. So it's a big deal. But you can see where I'm really hoping we'll get some really solid proposals in November and get council to hopefully make some awards early in this year. Because again, we need to start moving as quickly as possible. And I think that's my last slide. And so I'll turn it back over to Melissa to see if you how you want to manage the next step in the questions.
So I see Cammie does have a question.
Thank you, Doug, for the presentation. And I think that I might have asked this before on the solar, but specifically for the urban heat island, how can VIA plug into that and potentially be part of the delivery team?
Yeah. And so the first, and this is very early in the process, but the first iteration that I had of it had of this included multiple other stakeholders. The advice that we got from the city manager was, phase one, we need to look organizationally. What are we doing now that we can just reprioritize and focus what we're, if we're paving streets, if we're building buildings, if we're planting trees, get our house in order. Make sure that we are using this urban heat island mitigation approach, and then start bringing in other stakeholders. But I think we could, whether it's a part of this delivery team or maybe it's sort of a separate path, I think there's a huge opportunity to just start coordinating with VIA, with SAWS, with other institutions to make sure that we're all working off of the same playbook. So we can talk more offline about what we can do next.
And I'd like to chime in for the River Authority also, because I think that's a great opportunity to really to leverage the funds that we're spending also on the same initiatives. I think that would be great. I did see Dee Dee's hand go up next.
Thank you. I have two questions. Well, one question, one comment. On the energy efficiency projects, how did y'all determine which buildings would get the lighting retrofits?
Yeah, so basically our energy manager, Golda Obinzu, has an ongoing sort of 5-year plan. And basically we monitor energy consumption across our buildings. We have a backlog of projects. And so what she's always looking for is the projects that are going to have potentially the quickest ROI, where we can get because it's a relatively small fund. We usually have around $1 million a year. And so we're always looking for those things that are going to give us the biggest payback so we can keep getting the money out there.
Thanks for that. And I just want to make a comment about Urban Heat Island. Recently Deceleration News put out some really good maps of areas that have very high urban heat island. I was surprised at how fast they were able to do that. So I would hope we don't reinvent the wheel, maybe reach out to Greg Harmon from Deceleration. The Union of Concerned Scientists also did just one big map of San Antonio that targeted some of the urban core that was, suffering the most from urban heat island, and looking at Phoenix, because I think Phoenix has probably done a very good job of addressing it in areas where the poorest people live. So that's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Absolutely, and I've spoken with Greg, and we've already done some work with UTSA on mapping, and we're looking at working with Dr. DeBage and some other researchers on the next phase of just that. You know, how do you map and then how do you tie it to equity?
Adelita?
Yes, hi. I was wondering about the community grants as well that were mentioned, the Councilwoman Sandoval. And I know it's been really early. I mean, you know, we just acknowledgement of it's come out, so there may not be a structure in it. But I was just wondering, would that application process of grants go to the Office of Sustainability? And is there a rubric that's looking for who would get these grants?
So what I would say is really early to be determined. I think there's a few cities that have had similar grant programs that we could look at as models. Yeah, that's what I think we'll have to get to that conversation. But I don't. We'll have to have some structure in place to figure out how do we manage those.
Last two, David Walter and then Ryan Weber.
Yeah, just a question on the staffing. Is there any staffing with the pending or proposed benchmarking ordinance? Staffing related to support for that? I didn't see that specifically in the plan.
Yeah. So there isn't. The way the draft structure is for that policy now has a, and Karen will talk about it up next. With a 2-year voluntary phase, we believe existing staffing, as well as we have a really close relationship with Build San Antonio Green. We believe they could manage a voluntary program over a couple of years, but it would require, once it would become mandatory, it would require an additional FTE, but that would be a few years down the road.
Okay.
Ryan?
Just kind of a small question, Doug. In the run up to the budget, we'd also talked a bit about resilience hubs and seeing those as something. I was just curious to what extent either the OS budget or the fund, is that looking to overlap those hubs, expand those hubs, or are those parallel tracks?
Yeah, that's a great question. They're parallel tracks. I think our Office of Emergency Management is leading that effort. They and David McCary, correct me if I'm wrong, they'd received about $10 million, if I remember correctly, in last year's budget for planning and about $1 million for building four hubs. So they're in process. What I see is, particularly our climate adaptation manager, that new position, is providing technical support and really being able to support their work. But it is a parallel pathway.
And Doug, I'm sorry, I can't validate your numbers, but I do believe what you're saying. I don't.
Yeah, it sounds. I think 10 million was about right.
Okay, thanks.
I know that EOC gave a presentation recently, and they had already identified the 4 locations where they were looking to start building or incorporating some of those resiliency hub items.
And perhaps we could offer up, maybe at a future meeting, we can have Office of Emergency Management come and give an update, because I think it very much overlaps with this work. You know, resilience hubs are part of our climate plan, so maybe at a future meeting.
Sounds great. All right, next I'm going to turn it over to Karen Guz. She's been doing an amazing job chairing the subcommittee for the benchmarking, and so she'll give an update on the Building Energy Awareness Program.
Thanks. So I want to just remind everybody first, before I talk about the benefits of benchmarking, what this is. Benchmarking is a relatively simple concept. The idea is that on our large commercial buildings, they go through a free process of putting in some data into a system that's run by the EPA that puts out a score. So it helps energy perspective between like buildings, much like when you might go out to buy a large appliance, you might look at the information on a standard label that gives you a sense of how much it's going to cost you to run that appliance, or you look at miles per gallon that is put on vehicles. The idea is that we're now getting actionable, easily digestible information about our largest buildings. And it's a relatively simple process that's been used with a lot of cities. I wanted to emphasize today, though, about the process why the energy or benchmarking ordinance is pretty critical to our CAP plans. We've got a lot of exciting things happening recently that are great news, but I don't want to take our eyes off of this one as a great opportunity to really move the climate action plan forward in San Antonio. If we're able to pass this ordinance that would impact only our very largest buildings in San Antonio. So for perspective, 50,000 square foot buildings are proposed, and that's just 14% of our building stock in San Antonio. Those buildings are so large, relatively speaking, and cover so much of our square feet that they represent 70% of the floor space in San Antonio. So if this were to pass, we would end up with an ordinance helping to benchmark something that impacts relatively small number of buildings, but 70% of the floor space that we light, heat, and cool. So it's a very big deal for getting a sense of where we stand in a lot of our building stock in San Antonio. And in the process, what we achieve is improving our resilience. We end up with better resilience with our energy grid because this saves energy. And I'll show you some examples from some other cities. It increases the community awareness of buildings, the relationships of buildings and energy. There's a big equity component that I'm going to talk about a little bit more. And there's an opportunity for economic vitality and improved air quality, as this is something that relates to energy production and helps us with our ozone attainment. So let's go to the next slide. So I mentioned that there are some key equity co-benefits in here. One of them is health. When you improve a building and you work on particularly HVAC, you improve the indoor air quality in a lot of our largest buildings that people may be in all day, either because they live there or because they work there. And it also helps with the ozone attainment master plan. We end up improving our property values as we improve these buildings and make them more energy efficient. There's a great potential for identifying which buildings need retrofit, which is a good job opportunity. And then I want to focus some more on why this is an equity opportunity as well. A lot of people in San Antonio who are lower income live in multifamily. And multifamily are kind of a hard nut to crack on energy and water efficiency because they are on the meter, on the energy side, they're metered by unit. So it's hard to get the whole building look at each building that is multifamily and get a sense of which ones really need some help. So this has been shown in other places to really help that multifamily situation so that tenants can see what they might be paying in energy bills. And as we are aiming dollars to figure out where can we help the most, if we have scores on these multifamily buildings, we really get a sense of where can we aim those dollars we're so excited about having available to improve things in our community. Let's go to the next slide. So specifically on equity, I mentioned housing already. That housing is a big challenge for every community. And energy is not a small bill if you are a renter. You are probably paying your energy directly through a meter, and you don't have a lot of control over the energy efficiency of the equipment, the appliances, the lighting, the heating and cooling that you are using. So you don't really control a lot other than your thermostat. And so again, this opportunity to get the benchmarking on the buildings is really key. We also have a key opportunity for using that then to prioritize how we aim our dollars. Right now, you can guess, well, that's an older building, maybe it needs more help, but we don't really know until we start getting those relative scores. It's also key that the process helps us get a better understanding of what's going on in the buildings. So the Office of Sustainability gets really critical data from the benchmarking process to be able to look beyond this map you see of burdened tracks in San Antonio where we know there are challenges, but they are going to get a wealth of data behind the scenes that they can then use to say, well, not only is this track a challenge in all kinds of economic burdens, but we can also see that there are buildings not performing as well. And that's a further equity issue. Maybe it's clustered in certain areas. There's a lot we don't know until we get that data. And then finally, having that data every year is going to help us track our climate action success and how we're doing in improving our building stock in San Antonio. Next slide. So if we look at other cities, it's sometimes nice not to go first when you have 40 other cities that have gone ahead of us, because we have a lot of metrics from them to be able to say, this isn't an experiment, this works. It's a simple thing. And the voluntary actions that are taken after that score is available result in very measurable savings. If you look at some of these cities that passed similar ordinances, it is remarkable that in that stock of buildings, they achieved, through no further requirement, these significant energy savings that then translate also to carbon emissions reductions. So this is one of those golden opportunities, frankly. We have, it impacts a small number of very large buildings, and yet it has this outsized potential impact for our community in the energy savings and improving equity. So on the next slide, I'm not going to go into huge detail on our draft elements. What I want to emphasize, though, is that we have walked through with impacted stakeholder groups in great detail everything that might be included in an ordinance draft as this moves forward. There's not a draft yet, but we're looking at a timeline that hopefully this moves forward within this year. And things are outlined as what would likely go into an ordinance to say, as Doug pointed out, there'd be continued voluntary phase for 2 years after it passes. And then we'd phase in the very largest buildings, then the next size, and then get to full implementation. So there's a lot of detail that's been discussed with stakeholders. At this point, I will say that we've had certain stakeholders at the table, and they've been great about showing up and having these conversations. But if you are listening to this and you're thinking, I've got a group that wants to learn more about this, then let Doug know at the Office of Sustainability, and we will work that out to make sure that we get to your group to talk about this project and the potential for this ordinance. Because it's a great community conversation for us to have as this is being reviewed and hopefully moving forward. And if there are any questions, I can attempt to answer them, and I've got other people on here that can help out.
If I can just jump in, just in terms of status, and so what we've been working on, we got a lot of questions from council, and so and they were some very detailed questions around the profile of properties that would fall under this, and so we have folks who are sort of going through it, trying to sort of disaggregate a lot of the data and figure out, what are the implications. We're also working on a revamp to our website, including a public-facing survey, to just start getting more people to just be aware and weigh in. And then to Karen's point, continuing stakeholder engagement. I mean, I think that's the key. And then we're also, going to be soliciting additional guidance from mayor, council, and city manager's office as far as the path forward. So I'll stop there.
So I do see Dee Dee has a question.
I don't know if you mentioned it before, but on the buildings, 50,000 square feet, what percentage do those buildings compare to like the overall, like what percentage of it is of all the buildings in San Antonio?
It's, as I understand it, 14% of our building stock is a building over that size or larger. So it's not an enormous number of buildings. It's about 2,000 buildings in San Antonio that hit that size.
So why not, why 50,000 if it's such a small percentage of the overall building stock?
Great question. Yeah, great question. So in looking at it, one of the questions is how much of the conditioned floor space are we going to hit with that? So if we ask for 14% and 2,000 buildings to do this, we get benchmarked 70% of our square feet, because those 2,000 buildings are so large relative to other buildings that they make up 70% of what we heat, light, and cool. So they have an outsized influence on our energy consumption by buildings.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Arjun?
Can we take off the slide so we can see each other better? Thanks.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Karen, and the rest of the subcommittee for working on this. This is, I mean, energy efficiency is such a wonderful low-hanging fruit for climate mitigation, and it's something that I'm happy that so much thought has been put into this. I have a couple of questions. One of my questions is, I see that there's an exemption for industrial manufacturing use, and I'm curious about how you got there. And then the second question is, do you know where these 50,000 square foot plus buildings are located and what communities they are around and, might benefit from the point source pollution that'll be reduced from these measures, if any?
Yeah, so that'll be an interesting geographic analysis about where they are. And so great question on that one. I don't think we've seen a dot map of exactly the locations yet, but that's an interesting analysis to come. But on the industrial one, that's a really good question. So I'm trying to think the best way I can explain it is that this particular tool is one that is looking for buildings that have peer comparisons, because the way it works is you're saying, okay, you're an office building and we've got a lot of other office buildings to compare you to. So you're going to get a score that tells you, relatively speaking, are you more or less efficient than other buildings that are like you? Or if you're a hospital, we're going to compare you to hospitals. If you're a school, we have a lot of schools to compare you to. So there's many shopping centers. So most very large buildings have a very effective, meaningful peer comparison that the Energy Portfolio Manager tool for decades has proven out. Industrial, not that they don't need to do energy efficiency too, but just that they tend to use energy in very unique ways specific to their operation. So this particular tool is not meaningful in the same way for your typical industrial operation. So I wouldn't want anybody to conclude when you see exemption that that means somebody wants to not worry about industrial energy use. Not at all the case. It's just that this tool is highly effective for everyone for whom there's a really clear peer comparison. And that's a harder thing on industrial. So it's a very common thing across the other 40 cities that have passed ordinances that they look to use it where it's going to work the best, and it's just not industrial.
Sort of a follow-up question to that, and thank you for explaining it. The peer review kind of process makes sense. So do we know how much of a percentage industrial manufacturing takes in the 50,000 plus square foot building? Because I know you said that's like 70%.
Yeah.
I think it'd be just helpful to see, like,
yeah, it would be interesting to know that. And yeah. So maybe somebody's going to correct me on this, but here's one of the challenges we have. I work for San Antonio Water System, and I can tell you that it has taken us years to research our commercial industrial building customers and code them by what they actually do in the building. Utilities typically don't know that. We spent 2.5 years at SAWS putting a North American industrial coding thing on every customer we serve that's commercial. It took us a long time to do that. I don't know that we, for all of the buildings served by CPS Energy, I've got a CPS Energy person, Angela, here, who can tell me if CPS could tell us, how many of their buildings they serve, if they're able to code them by industrial or not. You see what I'm saying? So it's a different question than by the square feet. Angela?
Right, Karen. So that's one of the things we're currently working on, because through this benchmarking process, we noticed that as questions we're getting, especially from Doug's team, is, can you tell us how many, buildings are 50,000 square feet in your customer system? While often the customer and the building owner are different people, our relationship is with the customer. And so we don't have square footage of buildings, but we're kind of looking to do exactly what you said. We have some data analytics people seeing if there's a way to pull in the BCAD square footage and match it up with the addresses, as well as looking at the I'm kind of with you. I don't know what the
The North
the
American Industrial
NACIS
Code
right
coding. Yeah, there's a
yeah,
coding
so
system.
we're looking if there's a way to match that up as well to make this a little bit easier, but currently we don't have that ability.
And I'll tell you, Angela, we'll talk about this as a sidebar later. I am sure we could work something out to share where we've coded with CPS Energy and see if there's anything useful for you at CPS.
That would be great, Karen. Thank you.
Maybe not, but we can certainly try. But so my point was, it's not necessarily a simple question to answer. I think doing the benchmarking process as we have industrial buildings come forward and say, hey, I'm industrial, that will be helpful for us to confirm which ones are industrial, because that is one of the exemptions, and they have to come forward and say, this, we think this applies to us.
All right, David?
Yeah, thank you. Great presentation. I guess just a couple comments. So I work for a company that actually has a 50,000 square foot or larger building. So this is affecting us. And we've worked with CPS over the last several years to implement several. They came in and did a survey, and we've implemented several energy efficiency things in our buildings that have been very effective. And then we, as part of this process, we've been attempting to use the EPA tool to generate a benchmarking score. So just some experience from that is it's a very complex process to go through. I mean, we had to hire a consultant to help us with. It's not as simple as it may seem for buildings to enter this data. And in fact, but we're on board with doing benchmarking. We see the benefit of it for ourselves. In fact, after we met with Doug's group a couple of weeks ago, Golda helped us with and was helpful with filling out the information. We did make a few more changes to our building that I think we're going to see some benefits from. But my comment, or one trouble thing that we have is, for instance, our building, we've got a parking garage that has larger square footage than our building. It's all metered on the same meter. Because of that, we have to put in a sub-meter, which would cost another $10,000 or something in order to sub-meter that parking garage. So without doing that, we can't generate an EPA score. So I guess one question I have for you is, how would we be handled in the ordinance? Would we have to disclose that? Because we can't generate a score without doing some additional infrastructure work at our building.
Yeah,
Doug, do you want to take
say,
that?
Dave, yeah. Well, I would say, and then I'm looking at Adil there also on my little screen. But I think again, if there's any challenges that are going to prohibit you from being able to do it, and financial is one of them, right? I mean, and I don't think the expectation is having folks spend a whole bunch of money to sub-meter their building just to comply with an ordinance. But I think that's why there would be exemptions. But Adil, any thought on how to answer that question, or we need to follow up?
Yeah, I think you covered it. The most basic element of the ordinance would be the type of building and the size. And if your covered floor area does not include, that part, which would not make you have to comply, then perhaps you're exempted in that case. So I mean, that's just a general thing that I'm saying off topic, but I think we'd be talking about it on a case-by-case basis also.
Well, I think from a sensitivity, because I know part of the ordinance is this disclosure, is that, companies like us wouldn't get listed as non-compliance, or
yeah,
that would be listed as exempt or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
And
But I guess my broader point is this: it sounds simple to just go into the website and enter a bunch of data, but it took us like a lot of time with a dedicated building manager to do this. So it's not as simple as just going onto the website and entering a bunch of data. it takes quite a bit of work and resources, potentially consultants for these companies to be able to do this.
Yeah,
I
I agree with you, David. I mean, I think it's one, it depends upon the level of sophistication, right? There's folks who are doing, USAA is a great example. They've invested heavily in this and they know what they're doing. And then there's others, and you guys are a big company, right? But what about the smaller, the folks who don't even have the resources you do? That's why I sort of like the voluntary phase, to give people an opportunity to sort of get their feet wet. But that's the other reason why cities that have successfully done this have set up programs to provide resources and help desks.
Yeah, and
that's- Yeah, I think that was some of my question earlier about staffing. Is I think you're kind of doing this backwards. Is I think you need your staffing now in order, if you're going to be in your voluntary program and you want compliant, or you want people to actually do this, you need to have support staff to help and resources to help these companies do this. So, and I guess
that's a great recommendation. I mean, it really is.
I mean, I think that's an excellent use of this $10 million sustainability fund, right? I mean, if this is your biggest impact area, I think, and you want this implemented, you need to have resources to help it happen.
Yep.
And I guess
Appreciate
my bigger critique, and I'll close with this, is just on the mandate again, is I think we all can recognize that things that people do voluntarily in companies, you get a lot better engagement and a lot better results than from a mandate. And I know this is a 2-year voluntary, but it's written in as a mandate coming in 2 years or 3 years. And I guess my critique is, what has the city done in order to engage companies up to date, if this is a good thing, which we recognize, as my company recognizes this is a good thing for us to do, why aren't we out trying to promote this on a voluntary basis and get companies to do it on their own? I haven't seen that initiative to happen. It seems like over the last year, we could have been doing that to engage companies and say this is a good thing. And I think right now, with energy prices where they are, I think it's a good time to go out and engage companies and say, hey, we have a way that you can monitor what you're doing and find ways to improve.
I think that's the point. Well, sorry, go ahead, Karen.
Well, I was going to say, David, I think that, it's interesting how a surprising number of would appear to be buildings that would have to do it in the future are already choosing to do it. And I'm glad you're finding value in it. I do think in the 2-year voluntary phase, if the ordinance moves forward and passes in that format, that is going to be a big ramp up and a big effort to encourage as many buildings as possible to do it on a voluntary basis before it's a requirement, and to hold them up in a very positive way and say, isn't it great that these have already gotten on board and are doing it earlier than the requirement. I will just say my personal take on this, after hearing so much about it from other cities and things, that although doing things voluntarily is lovely and great, and it moves the needle forward in so many things in energy efficiency, ultimately having every building that's of these sizes that's in a peer group in the system makes all of the scores stronger and more meaningful. And it also makes it move the market in a very meaningful way, because although there's not, the scores come out, and it's not a requirement to retrofit your building, but because everybody's got a score and people make buying and leasing and renting decisions, building owners tend to apparently make some choices and look for opportunities to save and work with their energy efficiency utility and others. So, that getting everybody to do it at a certain point is what really appears to move the market in those other cities that have seen the great results.
Okay, we're running a little bit behind, so let's keep our questions short as possible. Joe, you're next.
Sorry.
Joe?
Mute button. Yeah, sorry to find my mute button. Yeah, my question is really, how does the benchmarking process consider remote sensing in buildings? So for example, my large campus building here is not actually run by the campus, it's run by College Station. And all the decisions, so, you know, theoretically they're doing that to manage the efficiency already.
Yeah.
I know a lot of buildings do have off-site sensing and control and management. I was wondering how that fits into the regulation,
So,
also how you benchmark that.
yeah, so it might impact how your score works out if it's being done incredibly well. But as I understand it, the inputs aren't to that level of complexity. That's more on the backside where you're going to look at your score and then try to say, we're doing great, or it looks like we could improve. What are we looking to tweak? And then as I look at case studies as to what buildings have done to improve their energy efficiency, some of them have gone to building energy systems that help them manage their energy more. So there are various changes that buildings make that are in case studies to improve their lot after they get their score. And it's hard to say what those are going to be, I think, until the scores come out.
Lalitha?
Thank you. I was wanting to piggyback off of what David was having to say, and I would say I'm thinking that David actually would make a great ambassador for this program. And so one of the community engagement strategies may be looking at a champion like David and his business and really highlighting that. And David, I know this might be some initial work on your part. Is there some way of capturing an algorithm on on how you did it so that it can be available for businesses who are looking at doing this during this voluntary phase as well? I think that could be some great ways of thinking about community engagement and champions from the business world to talk about how they did it and actually do presentations on it to other businesses, to some roundtables, etc. Thank you.
That's a good idea. Deanna?
Well, there's been really good discussion on this, y'all. I have one quick question about this as I'm trying to wrap my head around benchmarking and sort of the timeline. So what is the like balances that I saw that the ordinance has like 3 phases, right? So that's 4 years. But is this ordinance I don't want to use like we're basically at the baseline, right? The low hanging fruit, right? So what is it actually how many years is it actually gonna take for us to like actually see the reduction of emissions? How many years is that for that balance to actually move in a direction that we really need it to move? And really, like I think for me, I'm seeing sort of this really big urgency. And is this like one step of something larger? Like what is the next level of fruit that we're looking at that might get us closer to where we need to be in terms of air quality and health and sort of the things that we really need to move. And I think this part of the benchmarking piece is important because many of the largest buildings are owned by some of the largest polluters, right? But if it's voluntary and if it's not something that we're really pushing for, like how are we gonna get that buy-in in a way that doesn't massively just reduce our like funding pockets, right? And I think like that's something that we often see is like, well, in order for us to do this, you have to give us this incentive, which oftentimes could be a challenge. And me coming from a community organization, you know, we often see the lower end of that balance. And so I'm wanting to see what type of conversations or thoughts or ideas, and in terms of like timeline, when are we seeing sort of that shift happen?
Well, I can say that in the conversations during the stakeholder meetings, you know, we were balancing this sense of urgency to get the energy savings and the carbon emissions as fast as possible, with also trying to be effective with a large program that's you know, that we want to be a successful ramp up. And eventually we end up at the end of the 4 years impacting 70% of our building floor space. So that's pretty significant. But I think we are also trying to recognize that by phasing it in, we have a better chance of having a successful relationship with those who are impacted by what is a regulation and something that they have to get done. And over time, what we'll build is that data will be more effective. You know, CPS Energy may find it incredibly useful as their programs are evolving. And certainly the Office of Sustainability will find it incredibly useful for any other grants and dollars that are available to target. So, you know, it's hard for us to say exactly when we achieve what we're hoping for. When I've seen the graphs of eventual carbon emissions, they show the emissions growing at a really steady rate over the next 20, 30 years. Like it shows a ramp up and then over time it continuing to grow as a benefit if we're successful in getting this passed.
I think that's a good segue to start moving on with the Energy Subcommittee report. Doug, is there a presentation for that? I'm going to hand that over to Ryan.
All right, thanks very much, Melissa. So I'm just standing a little bit. What we have done at this point on the Energy Subcommittee is to decide to have one through a vote of this committee. Of course, back in January, we've now had one subcommittee call. We have not fully locked in the membership or selected a chair. So we are a bit on the early days, and I think I won't speak for the rest of the committee, but I think not going quite as fast as we'd hope. We're trying to kind of catch up a little bit on it. We did have the first meeting on August 25th, and we did a couple of things. One, had some great updates, both from Dee Dee and from Angela on the progress of the RAC. We know from earlier conversations on this subcommittee that has overlaps with some of what this committee does, or at least the potential of overlaps. And as we are still trying to kind of finalize and come back to this broader committee with what we think the full and proper remit of the subcommittee could be, I am speaking for the group here, but I would encourage anyone to correct or challenge this, trying to make sure that we are finding those productive overlaps, where we are identifying what the remit of this team is, where things are better addressed through the RAC, but also, and apologies, I'm not going through the full notes, but also noting that there are some topics that the RAC is addressing that we still think it is useful for this subcommittee to address coming from a slightly different perspective. So one of the kind of main outcomes of the meeting so far is that we do have some members who sit on both the RAC and either the SA Climate Ready technical advisor, the equity committee, or even specifically look to join the energy subcommittee. We don't want to rely on those who are covering both responsibilities to be the full representation of either the technical committee, the equity committee, or this subcommittee. So we are looking to identify some responsibilities for some members of the subcommittee to attend the RAC and to be able to speak as representatives of the committee or as part of the public comment without needing to put all that pressure on those members who actually sit on the RAC and have specific responsibilities to that committee as well. So we're trying to make sure that we're not causing too much confusion on kind of who's speaking for what or things like that. I think we also, as kind of mentioned in here, there are a number of actually updates from the RAC that we covered, and I don't know if Dee Dee or others want to touch on those. Some of them are listed here. Obviously, the RAC is making tons of progress, but those who actually sit on that committee can speak to it. The main update from the Energy Subcommittee is that we need to somewhat urgently have our next meetings and lock in the membership, the chair, the full remit of the committee, and what we hope to deliver, so we can bring it back to this full committee and then kind of get some agreement and get to work. And I would invite, I mentioned Dee Dee by name, but anyone else who was in the meeting on August 25th, or Julia, who is chairing it, if there's any corrections to those statements or broadening of what we covered.
Evelita or Dee Dee?
I think you covered it.
I do too.
Great, thank you. I see, Deanna, you have a question?
Sorry that I didn't lower my hand from the last one.
Anybody else with questions? So with that, we'll turn it over to, this is a new slide. Do we have any updates on the rate advisory committee? Was that part of?
None from me.
Yeah, I didn't know if there was any specific comments from Didi, Alita, or Anakwa, or if Angela wants to provide any updates. I mean, CPS had some pretty significant projects announced recently. If there was any updates from you, Angela, as well.
Sure, Doug. I think the only newest thing from when the Energy Subcommittee met was that we were talking about having some additional public sessions where people could come and give us feedback on our generation planning, the different modeling scenarios. And one is going to be on October 6th. There's an AM session and a PM session. And I'll email out the exact times and dates, but it's going to be at our headquarters, and there'll be opportunity to get additional public input. I believe it's October 6th, and I think the other one is December 1st, but I need to double check those dates and get the proper times to you. And I think one of the biggest announcements, again, that we've had since our last meeting, as far as our generation portfolio goes, is we've been looking to add up to 900 megawatts more of solar. And earlier this year, we announced a deal for 300 megawatts. And then just last week, we announced a deal for 180 megawatts. So we're a little over halfway there towards the up to 900 megawatts. We haven't signed any agreements for energy storage yet or firming capacity, but those are hoping to be announced soon. So those are two things I did want to share for awareness.
Great, thank you. All right, next we have an update from Joe on the climate equity tool. Joe, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, yeah, the climate equity screening tool subcommittee has been working on this for a number of months. We finally have a pretty complete draft, which you should have received. I'm not going to go over the draft in details. I'm going to cover the broad sketches. The climate equity screening tool is to use for any proposals coming to the city sustainability office. This would be projects, programs, actions. A lot of the things that we talked about today would fit under the evaluation umbrella of this equity tool. The tool uses a series of 6 steps to kind of rank the tool. Each step is kind of given a verb, kind of an action orientation towards what the proposal or project should be doing. So in the first step, you describe the proposal and proposed actions, which includes considering the stakeholders, looking at things like how it advances climate equity, adaptation, mitigation, and resiliency, what areas of racial equity are impacted, accessibility, affordability, health, safety, etc. And what resources are going to be needed to maintain the project in the long term. Related to that is identify data and accountability. What are the metrics that are going to be used? We referenced the city's equity atlas, as well as the EPA's environmental justice screening tool, which would be resources to put together these proposals. What is the current data telling us? Who is accountable? How is the data disaggregated to inform equity decisions? 3 is engage the community. So how is the community engaged? And there's a scale of engagement from minimal engagement of informing to consult, involve, collaborate, and empower. And those are all defined in the screening tool. Has the community given any letters of support for the proposal or project? What has been learned throughout that process? 4 is acknowledge disproportional impacts. This really kind of relates to geography. Where are the actions and projects going to be located? Who is going to benefit? What are the current existing climate hazards or barriers to equity in those areas? How does the proposal choose to remove, reduce these hazards or barriers that are already currently existing there? And who will see the benefits from the project or proposal? 5, consider financial opportunity. This is kind of two dimensions. I think we were kind of talking about that already. In terms of cost savings would be 1, affordability for community members, but also in terms of contracts and job opportunities, our local businesses being sought. Is the benefit, financial benefit, not just from the climate proposal, but in an equity sense, our opportunities being developed in the community. So it's kind of a comprehensive examination of the financial aspect of any proposal. And last, respect cultural relevance and history. Just kind of looking at historic assets, traditions, particularly in communities of color. Is anything in this proposal negatively impacting existing material or non-material culture? Do we have to change, tear down, develop something? How is that being managed? Does the proposal improve social capital, that is trust and cooperation, communication, solidarity within the community? Is it helping develop? Is the language appropriately used, particularly in terms of bilingual communication? And does the proposal use indigenous ecological knowledge? And does it relate to issues of tribal indigeneity? All 6 of these steps, and I kind of went over the questions fairly briefly in my description. All 6 of these steps would then be ranked using a rubric at the end of the tool. So each step would get a significant ranking, moderate ranking, insignificant, or detriment. A significant would be the best. That means this is it's clear, it's communicating what it's supposed to do, it's answering all the questions the way they should be. There's nothing kind of left up to the imagination. A moderate, there might be gaps there in between what would be considered a significant proposal. So for example, with community engagement, significant would be involve or hire. A moderate one would be lower than that, maybe inform or relate. An insignificant one would not have much of a plan for community involvement. A detriment would be that it's actually going to make things worse, that it would not, it would either make equity issues more problematic or not deal with climate issues and have some particular negative impact in some way. I guess we got open for questions. I did have a motion that I wanted to make as well.
So just so everyone is aware, the tool was actually emailed by Doug earlier, so it was attached. It's an 8-page document. So I'll open up for questions. Harjit?
Let me unmute. So I was, full disclosure, I was on this committee and I went to a couple of meetings. Apologies, you guys, for not going to all of them, but I just wanted to sort of toot our own horn a little bit. This is a policy mechanism that is, I think, very cool. I have had the privilege of working on municipal level climate policies, and we've thought about screening tools, and these screening tools that the city of San Antonio has created. I know the sustainability one was lauded in other cities, including the County of Los Angeles also loved it. They would talk to me about it all the time when I worked there. So I just wanted to sort of note that a screening tool like this, the possibility is pretty endless. I mean, yes, the motion, as you probably see, is for the Office of Sustainability to use the draft tool, and then perhaps, and I don't want to say this wrong, Doug, please correct me if I'm wrong, but perhaps other municipal agencies eventually perhaps using this in the future. I mean, being able to give a step-by-step method for folks to think about equity, and specifically climate equity, is game changing, because climate equity is very difficult to understand from, like, just if you've never really engaged with it as much. And it's very niche, but it's very important, and it's probably one of the most important things that we're doing here, in my opinion. And so I just wanted to note that us having this equity screening tool will probably, make a really big difference for not only the policy world, but also just for the city of San Antonio. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I could add to that, I think another we were talking about with this is that it really helps develop a benchmark for the types of proposals we get. So if people are aware this is going to be reviewed using this metric, they will start to address these issues before they make proposals, before suggestions are made. And so that will enhance the kind of projects that the city is going to get and develop beforehand as well.
Tammy?
Thank you, and well done to the committee, and great overview, Joe. I'm really impressed, and wondering about, I think we had some time ago talked a little bit about potentially using a tool like this for screening of the housing projects under the bond. Wondering if that's an opportunity. I'd love to see it used for, like, screening for future bond projects in general, but just wondering, especially in terms of materials, construction methods, that type of thing. It seems like it could have a lot of applicability, and I'd love to know if we'll be able to do that.
So Cammie, just want to let you know that as the River Authority was doing an analysis on all the bond projects in different districts, we did use this tool as one of the screening components. So, I mean, we've already used it as part of the analysis that we did. So I think it was a great tool that was developed.
And I would just add, and I think Cammie, you're right. I think the goal is let OS lead first. Let's test this on some of our policies and programs and show how it works. And then the goal is to start bringing other folks along in the evolution of the tool. And this is something, and I just want to thank the Joe and Harjo and then the other members of the subcommittee. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of calls where we were in the minutia, but this is the same conversation that other cities are having. How do you do this? And it's the same thing where it's starting with an office like ours with the goal of leading by example, and then bringing other departments and agencies along after we show that it can work and it can deliver good results.
Yeah, and we could definitely use it too. So thank you again.
Adelita? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yes, I just want to echo great work. Thank you so much. It's been a task, and you guys have done so well. So a couple of things. The first is with the 4 critical questions that are on the document. the number one is eliminate racial inequalities and advances equity. And everywhere else on the document is equity. I was wondering if that was to be eliminate racial inequity. So that was one comment. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I would go ahead. I'll answer all your comments at the end. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. And the second is just something that I just wanted to bring to everybody's attention. And in a nursing profession and in some of the literature, we're struggling with this as well. The word empowerment, which you have on the spectrum of engagement, there's a lot of voices now that are looking at that word empowerment as a privilege, as looking at it from a privileged perspective, and it ignores structural barriers, and sometimes blaming, or can be seen as blaming people for not having power. So we need to empower them. And I say this just to, this is a term that this is something I'm hearing a lot in different diversity, equity, and inclusion committees that I'm on, and how do we frame that? So I'm not saying to change it. I just wanted to bring it to the committee, particularly since it's a climate equity tool, that this is dialogue that's going on right now. So just wanted to say, just to make this committee aware of it. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think we can make that minor edit, certainly, with the inequities. And it's still in draft form, so we're hoping to have the city, my motion is to hope to have the city do a review of this and provide us with detailed feedback on what works and what doesn't. And I would extend that to the entire committee. If everyone can look at it and provide us notes, then we can make a stronger fight. Once this is formalized and given all of the polish that it needs to be put on the website and let everybody see it, I think that's great. On your note on empowerment, I think it is a tricky thing to say in terms of, like, you know, the position of authority and power. I think in terms of the perspective with this document, the perspective is from the city of San Antonio as the main user of this. It's kind of, how is the city engaging with others? And so at the first, what's the responsibility of the city? And in turn, I understand this kind of sensitivity in terms of that last stage of empowerment, kind of the shifting of responsibility. That is a huge, I mean, to be in that last category, I think is very difficult for any project done by any government, to have the people who are most affected by it have control over it, which is what that stage of social community engagement is a very difficult and high bar to hit. And I think I do acknowledge your the problematic aspect of it as well.
Just to say, we're doing a strategic plan, and we were going back and forth with including that word in there because there's so much dialogue about it nationally.
And the reason we included this is because it kept coming up. How do you define community engagement? So we wanted this thing we call community engagement, and this was a tool that this was a scale that already existed that we can reference, that was very well defined. So we could define proposals on this scale and say they are community engagement and that. So it wasn't vaguely left open. That was why it was adopted.
Walter?
Just a question. I guess, you know, I see a lot of this like mitigating harmful things, but I guess my question is how does this balance out some of the other benefits of a project like economic benefits? If you were to think of, like, I don't know, an airport improvement project, or you know, building in a new road or somewhere that's going to provide economic development. how does that get, you know, balanced against some of these other things? I'm just curious how this gets implemented.
Well, I like Doug to respond to this too, but my perspective on it is if a proposal to the city is funded and headlined as a climate action proposal, then it would need to meet these guidelines. An airport might have other municipal benefits, but we wouldn't build another airport necessarily as a climate action initiative. We could certainly evaluate its climate impact, and this screening tool could be used to say, okay, this is going to have harmful impacts and we need to manage those against other things. So I think, to me, in terms of like where the intent is coming from and how it's evaluated, if you use it
So let me just clarify then. So then what I'm understanding is this is intended for climate related projects, not just as a broad on broad policy basis or
Yeah,
or
this,
broad
and if
projects?
I can jump in, this is the intent for this is through the implementation of the SA Climate Ready Plan, as we develop policies or programs, we should have an assessment. Use this tool to assess the potential benefit or impacts related to equity. That being said, and I think David, you make up a good point. This becomes a policy decision. There may be policies that council are considering where equity may not be the driving force for the consideration. It may be jobs. It may be something else. And this is just my perspective of using this tool. It's to be able to provide council multiple, to say, we did an equity assessment. Here's the pros, here's the cons. We tried to mitigate it the best we can, but there may be other factors that council is going to consider. So it's just one piece of the policy discussion.
So I would anticipate that the tool would be used like to vet all bond projects or whatever projects are coming through being funded by the city, to be able to provide that input of what are the impacts and what could be done differently for mitigation.
What I would say at this point, I think we need to use it within the Office of Sustainability, what's within our realm of control right now. And again, with the hope that, again, proving that it can work, and then that, ideally expand it. But I think right now it's just within the wheelhouse of Office of Sustainability, whatever we're focused on. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Melissa, I apologize.
No worries.
I agree with Melissa as well. I think every project that is, if climate is important and equity is important, every action that the city takes should have metrics relevant to those components. And a screening tool like this are gonna highlight those issues. I think you have to build a culture of using this and setting standards. And so using it within the Office of Sustainability first will help initiate, and it's already been used in other contexts. And I think people are excited to use this in other areas too. So I think I see it in ways.
I just wanted to jump in and say, with the other benefit of using this tool is that with a lot of policies we've always had hard numbers on how many jobs is this going to create, how much money is this going to make, how much money is this going to save, right? We haven't had those kind of metrics, those numbers, or any sort of indication of whether on climate or on equity or on climate equity. And so this is just a tool for creating that, to add a specific measurable metric into that, the general pool of considerations whenever you're looking at a policy. And so it's really just leveling the playing field in terms of priorities that City Council will look into for any given policy.
Adelita?
Yes, thank you. I think it's a great tool. I do like the idea of the metrics and having that metric. So we've never had it before and never had it as a decision, uh, uh, making decisions by our policymakers. However, it just occurred to me, if we're going to put everything, at least from climate adaptation, through this screening tool, and it doesn't receive a good rating, how is that information going to be considered? How is it going to be communicated to the community in which this adaptation strategy may impact? So not that there's any answers for it, but it just occurred to me, if we're going to do the screening, if something doesn't do well in the screening, but it does have an economic benefit, so maybe more jobs, how do we handle that? Again, no easy answer. Again, it just occurred to me, and I'm wondering if we need to think about that as we move along.
There are some suggestions in the tool. So for example, with a moderate rating, there may be a revision stage where the proposal is revised or a modified. An insignificant might not be sufficient enough for a revision, maybe a rethinking process for an insufficient. I think something with a detriment, that intention there is that we're moving in the wrong direction relative to the frame of this tool. And so then that would be a warning space, but Doug might have different thoughts on that.
You're on mute, Doug.
Yeah, and I think we're running low on time and have one more agenda item. But I think Dr. Cantu, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? It's how do you do it, and how do you use it, and then what do you do when you get the results that you get? And so I think that's the part of testing it and seeing. I think when it was originally envisioned, when we were developing the climate plan, it was wanting to put a mechanism that required that questions were being asked at the right time before we got too far along in a policy development process, to make sure that we mitigate any issues that are going to be exacerbated, or it can be improved from that equity perspective. I think putting it into practice is something different, and I think until we start doing it, we won't really know how to do it.
And I think this is also just a tool that can assist our leaders to make better informed decisions. One more question, Neil, and then we need to move on.
Yeah, piggyback off what Doug was mentioning in terms of testing it, it seems like the tool's at a fairly mature state, as well as our energy benchmarking policy. So has the energy benchmarking gone through the tool yet, or is that a next step that we could think about, is testing this? Or
that's my thought. I think I was personally waiting to get to the tool to the point where we could actually have you all get your eyes on it, provide some additional feedback, and then we could test it. And I was going to ask the group, I don't know if we need a formal motion for this. I mean, I think of course it's up to you all. I think if a simple request would be fine, but I leave that up to you guys.
I'm at the mercy of the chair. I think the next step would be to have the city sustainability office, do a thorough review of one proposal and send that back, but also with editorial comments so that we can strengthen it. Are there things missing, wordings and those kinds of things, and then we can finalize it after that.
So yeah, I agree. I don't think that a motion is needed. That's just something that the Office of Sustainability does, and then we can get the feedback. And then I would also encourage everybody on the call to just read through the document and provide feedback on what's been provided.
Yes, please provide feedback.
Thanks, Joe. All right, I'm gonna hand it over to Ashley, who's going to give us an update on the San Antonio Climate Ready engagement and communications.
Okay. you want to go ahead and go to there we are. And these will be quick. There's only 3 slides I have. Wanted to give a quick update. We are just wrapping up our 2nd month of actually being live in the community. So if you all remember, the first year was all about gathering input. We've been sharing all the research updates that we've done with all of our key stakeholder audiences. And we took that in year 2 and put it in through a communications and engagement plan that launched late July. And to date, part of the goal is driving people to be able to take a pledge on the sustainability dashboard. This is just a quick screenshot of a section of where the pledge language is on that dashboard. And to date, those first 2 months, we have a total of 125 pledges. So we're really happy with those numbers. Of those 125, there are actually 25 total comments that were left as well. If you want to go to the next slide, we'll just show you a quick snippet of those. All of them very positive. So that's always great to see as well. And a mix of businesses and residents or both. So the pledge on the dashboard gives you the option to self-identify as a resident or as a business or as both, business owner or as both. And so these are some of the things that people are saying of why they care, why it matters to them within the community. I'll just read 2 off the screen. You can read the rest later, but we need to care about how our actions affect our neighborhood, our city, and our world. We have to do something because our government won't put the world's well-being first. So you could say that potentially is negative, but I think it's positive behind the intention of seeing the need for some urgency, which is what we heard in all the research as well. It impacts all of us, our future economy. I desire a cleaner, sustainable environment for our community. So a lot of great things that we're hearing and seeing. We're also allowing people to self-identify what district that they are in, what council district. So we're able to gather some of that data as well to be able to share with representatives to understand the numbers from within their communities. And then along the same lines, what we've been doing on a parallel path, if you remember in the first year, we had a grant component through this contract where we were putting money back from the contract into community-based organizations and nonprofits. And in year 1, they were helping us gather input and they were doing research for us within their memberships and their networks. And then now at the 2nd stage that we're at the educate and empower phase, we've moved from year 1, which was 4 grantees, to now we have a total of 14 that we're working with and helping fund. And what they're doing is they're taking the messaging and the concept that we came up with for the community at large, and they're translating it into their networks in language that is appropriate for their audience base. And they're coming up with communications plans that they're sharing with us to say, here's how we find it best to educate and empower our community and our networks. And we've basically created an asset tool where we give them templated materials that they can choose to use if they want, and then they make it what they will that they think is most relevant for their audiences. So this is a list of the groups that we selected to fund after we went through the proposal process to request for submissions. So much more detailed overview from us as we get further along. Like I said, we're just the first 2 months in, but have been very happy with the response that we've seen thus far from people responding, driving traffic to the site, leaving comments, etc. And that's it for my update, unless there are any questions.
Seeing any hands for questions? Okay, no questions? Thank you so much, Ashley. Okay, right now we'll open it up for any items for discussion in open space. This would be any items that anyone would like to share or propose as new business for consideration at a future meeting. Is there anything that anybody would like to propose for the next meeting?
I don't really have a specific piece, but I know there's a lot of movement happening with the RAC, and I'm wondering if there is reports or anything that comes out, what the process is for like calling a special meeting to review without having to wait the 3 months, because our next meeting is in December, correct?
for
I don't know if
November.
Angela or Adelita or Dee Dee would have an update on that.
I think we need to have like a energy subcommittee meeting separately before the end of the year, because the goal of the rate advisory committee discussions and everything is to have some type of recommendation to our board of trustees in December. So that would be too late to, if we waited till our December meeting, we'd be too late to discuss. So I think it would have to be a special energy subcommittee.
So Doug did put up the schedule that our next meeting is November 29th. And so hopefully that would meet your schedule for getting in.
Well, what I would say is also if the group, if there's an interest in, Angela, to your point, having not just the subcommittee, but if there's something that you all believe would be important to discuss related to the RAC prior to the end of the year, you can always schedule a special meeting to just focus on that item.
Any
So
other
Deanna, I
items?
guess what we'll do is staff will talk with the chairs, and then maybe Angela, we can sort of bring you into that conversation and just figure out the when and the where, if that's something that you all want to do.
Cami?
Yeah, if it's appropriate, I would like to suggest either at the next meeting or maybe the following meeting that we do provide an overview of the Keep San Antonio Moving and it's really almost like an overhaul of what VIA is looking to do with the voter approved plan, with the transit resources, and specifically how that aligns with the CAP, especially because of the significant resources that we are expecting coming from the US DOT to support San Antonio. So if it's appropriate, I would like to propose just providing and just an overview of what's happening, just to equip everyone with that knowledge.
Okay. Brian?
Thanks. I was going to say in relation to the point that was raised, I think we are hoping to schedule a couple meetings of the energy subcommittee, and again, the membership for that is not set, but also that's not seen as specifically some kind of RAC oversight. That the RAC has its own structure and things like that, and the energy committee is looking at some similar things. I do think it'd be interesting, again, depending on how the timing works, for the full committee to see and get a brief on some of those RAC recommendations before they come out. Because I think it bridges into a lot of things that are even broader than what the energy subcommittee is trying to chew on. And again, that's where we finalize it. So hopefully the next meeting, one of the ambitions is to come back to the full committee with what they hope the energy subcommittee will be actually doing. But just with the timing, I think it's a great point that it's another kind of major moment in terms of some of the decisions and things like that will influence the CAP. And it would be fascinating to hear the full committee's involvement on that, but not to expect the energy subcommittee to speak for the full committee, because that's definitely not the intent.
Adelita?
Yeah, I was just next meeting or the meeting after that, Ashley, maybe if you could talk to us about ways that you are engaging the school districts, if there's any movement there.
I'm happy that sounds great. Sure.
Then I'm also adding an update on the resiliency hubs, providing a presentation on that. All right. Anything else? Someone would make a motion to adjourn?
Sorry, I have a question, which is just only because I'm so unfamiliar with some of the city cycles and things like that. I see the calendar here we have through November. Doug, I'm curious if there are other things coming up on the city or to Angela and others as far as the utility. Are there other things that are questions that we should be thinking about at the launch of the new calendar year, or is all the stuff we need to talk about more fiscally oriented? And then the second, my own ignorance on the remit of this committee, and as we look into 2023, what does the cycle of this committee look like?
Yeah, I think I need to chew on that a little. I mean, I think that the one thing that I think we'll need to discuss and figure out how it fits into our committee business is what Councilwoman Sandoval was talking about. That's huge, and it's no easy feat to say, okay, here's funding. What are we going to do with it? And so I think we're going to have to sooner than later to figure out how do we carve out that time to have, particularly if the councilwoman's asking and council's going to be looking for this committee's input. What are we doing? So that, I think that's got to be a priority. In terms of other things, I think the other real big thing, and it's tied to that previous one, is the federal funding. I mean, that's huge. So I think that's the big thing. It's like, how do we take the climate plan and really prioritize what do we need to be doing across sectors and start getting concrete ideas on paper so we could start going after dollars. I mean, I think that's and I think every other community is going to be doing the same thing. But you all represent such diverse stakeholders. If we can get some sort of consensus, we'll have a leg up. So that's my initial response.
And I would think for meetings, we would kind of mirror what we did this year, where we have January, March, May, like every other month.
Well, and that's the other thing. Thank you for saying that. That's the other thing. Just because we have meetings, every other month, that's what it was. It doesn't. If there's so much work that needs to be done, and particularly if my office is getting additional staffing capacity, if there's a need to meet more than every other month, that's a viable option. You all just need to decide if that's that you want to do.
Okay. I did want to note that we did hear that the future meetings probably need to be in person, or
a recommendation was made from the attorneys that ideally at least hybrid, where we have something in person and some people can be remote. So that was one of the recommendations that we got.
Right. Someone want to give a motion to adjourn?
With apologies, sorry, new hand, but just a small one. Just to say, Doug, you'd mentioned that the 2021 inventory might be ready. We have a lot of things already on the list of things we want to talk about, but it seems like either a presentation or at least sending it around in time for questions on that would be
yeah.
Really
And I spoke with we work with ICLEI on that, and they're doing a QA/QC, and so we're expecting something by the end of October. So slap that on the agenda. I do agree that's really going to be a big data point for discussion.
Anything else?
David Walter moves to adjourn.
Thank you, David.
A second.
Ryan Weber seconds.
I'm sorry, who seconded?
That could be
Ryan
Ryan
Weber.
Right, okay. All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. You have a good evening.
All right. Thank you, Melissa.
Thanks, Melissa. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.